The ship landed with a soft hiss on the gleaming platform. Joey checked his breathing mask one last time and grabbed his small bag of personal items. All his equipment and plant samples had already been sent ahead to the research facility. After 3 months of space travel, he was finally here. Neotura, the jewel of the Aldebaran system and home to the most advanced coalition of scientists in this part of the galaxy. Jay stepped out of the ship and felt the lighter gravity immediately. Despite being similar in size to Earth, Neotura had only about 80% of its gravitational pull. It made him feel oddly buoyant as he walked down the ramp. A small group waited for him at the bottom. Most were clearly celestials. Their skin had a subtle glow that pulsed gently with their heartbeats, and their eyes were larger than human eyes, with pupils that shifted color based on their emotions. Currently, most showed a cool blue, polite interest, nothing more. One celestial stepped forward. Unlike the others who wore the standard white research uniforms, she was dressed in a deep purple robe with silver symbols running down the sleeves. Her skin glowed brighter than the others, and her eyes were a striking violet. Dr. J. Kim of Earth, she said, her voice melodious but lacking warmth. I am head researcher Hana. Welcome to the Neotura Coalition. Jay bowed slightly, respecting what he knew of celestial customs. Thank you for accepting my application. I'm honored to join your work. Hannah's eyes flickered briefly to yellow, amusement, or perhaps doubt. Yes, well, we have never had a human in our botanical division before. The council was curious about your methods. The way she said curious made it clear that she personally was not. My equipment arrived safely, Jai asked, choosing to focus on the practical. It has been placed in Laboratory 7. You will be shown there after the welcome ceremony. Hannah turned without waiting for his response and began walking toward a tall, crystal-like building that seemed to capture and amplify the light from Neotura's twin suns. A younger celestial with a friendly glow stepped closer to Jai. I'm Research Assistant Jai. I'll be helping you get settled. Her eyes were a warm green, and her smile seemed genuine. Don't mind, Head Researcher Hana. She's like that with everyone at first. Thanks, Jay said, returning her smile. Is there anything I should know before the ceremony? Day nodded. Just stand when introduced, and don't speak unless directly asked a question. It's mostly formalities. The ceremony took place in a large circular room with walls that seemed to shift between solid and transparent. Around 50 celestials sat in tiered seats, all wearing robes that indicated their rank and specialty. Jai stood out in his simple Earth uniform, practical gray pants and jacket with the Earth Sciences Division patch on the shoulder. An older celestial with skin that glowed a steady gold introduced the various new members joining the coalition. When Jay's name was called, he stood as instructed. Dr. J. Kim of Earth, specialist in adaptive botany and terrafounding techniques, the elder announced. A murmur went through the crowd. Jay noticed several celestials leaning to whisper to each other, their skin flickering with quick pulses of light that he couldn't interpret. Hana stood from her position at the front row. Elder Mund, if I may, I believe the council should be aware of Dr. Kim's unique position. The elder tilted his head, curiosity in his golden eyes. Proceed, Head Researcher. Hana turned to face the gathered scientists. Dr. Kim comes to us not as a representative of Earth's elite botanical institute, as one might expect for such a posting, but from their secondary terraforming division. His methods involve what they call hands-on adaptation, rather than the preferred genetic engineering approach used by most advanced civilizations. She paused, letting her words sink in. Furthermore, Dr. Kim lacks the usual credentials we expect. He has no registered genetic enhancements, no family lineage in the sciences, and his academic background is from an institution that ranks only in the top 50 on Earth, not the top 5, as is our standard. Jay felt his face grow hot, but he kept his expression neutral. He had expected some resistance, but not this public questioning of his qualifications. However, Hana continued, her voice taking on an artificially light tone. The council felt that his unusual approach might offer a fresh perspective on our more challenging regions. The northeastern quadrant has been assigned to him. More murmurs filled the room. Even Jay knew what that meant. They had given him the area that had resisted all previous restoration attempts. It was essentially setting him up to fail. Elder Munn nodded slowly. Thank you for that clarification, head researcher. Dr. Kim, do you wish to respond? All eyes turned to Jai. He took a deep breath. I thank head researcher Hannah for her thorough introduction, he said calmly. It's true that I don't come from what you might consider an elite background. On Earth, we have a saying, the tree with the deepest roots isn't always the one that bears the most fruit. Jai looked directly at Hannah. I'm here because sometimes problems require different approaches. The northeastern quadrant has resisted traditional methods. Perhaps it will respond to something new. I look forward to contributing what I can to the Coalition's important work. He sat down, heart pounding. Beside him, Da's skin glowed with a warm orange that somehow felt approving. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Afterward, as the scientists dispersed to their various labs, Da guided Jay through the winding crystal corridors of the research center. That was well handled, she said as they walked. Most newcomers challenged by Hannah either get angry or apologetic. You were neither. Jay shrugged. Getting angry wouldn't help my plants grow, and I have nothing to apologize for. Da laughed, a sound like small bells. An interesting perspective. Here we are, Laboratory 7. The lab was smaller than the others they had passed, but well equipped. Through the transparent back wall, Jay could see a small field area that extended to a force barrier, beyond which lay the wild landscape of Neoterra, beautiful but clearly struggling. The plants were pale, many leaning at odd angles as if fighting to stand. Your samples arrived yesterday, Daz said, pointing to a series of sealed containers. They've been kept in stasis as requested. Jay moved immediately to check them, relief washing over him as he confirmed everything was intact. 3 months of careful cultivation before the journey, all his best candidates for adaptation to Neoterra's unique environment. Will you need assistance unpacking? Dai asked. If you have time, I'd appreciate it, Jay replied. And maybe you could tell me more about the northeastern quadrant while we work. For the next 2 hours, they set up his lab. Dad explained that the northeastern region had once been vibrant with Neoterra's native plant life, but over the past decade, something had changed in the soil composition. All attempts to restore the native plants had failed, and imported species hadn't fared any better. Hannah's team tried everything from gene editing the native species to creating entirely new plants, Dad explained. Nothing takes root for more than a few weeks before withering. Jay nodded thoughtfully as he carefully removed a sealed container of earth seedlings. Were these tests done in controlled environments, or in the actual field? Mostly in controlled environments, Dai said. Our methods focus on perfecting the organism before introduction. That might be part of the problem, Jay murmured. Plants aren't just isolated organisms. They're part of a complex web. Sometimes they need to struggle a bit to adapt properly. Day's skin flickered with interest. That's not how we approach problems here. Which might be why the northeast quadrant is still failing, Jay said, then quickly added, no disrespect intended to previous efforts. Daz smiled. None taken. I'm curious to see your methods in action. She paused, then asked more quietly, is it true you have no family history in the sciences? No genetic modifications for intellectual enhancement? Jay shook his head. My parents were farmers. I'm the first in my family to become a scientist. And no genetic modifications. Those are reserved for medical necessities on Earth, not enhancement. Day's eyes widened, shifting to a curious purple. How fascinating. Here, one's pedigree is everything. Each celestial can trace their genetic heritage back hundreds of generations, with every enhancement and achievement carefully recorded. And Hannah? Jai asked. I'm guessing her pedigree is impressive. One of the most distinguished on Neoterra. Dad confirmed. 17 generations of top scientists, with genetic modifications for enhanced cognitive processing, perfect recall, and advanced intuitive leads. Jay whistled softly. No wonder she looks at me like I'm a primitive. To her, you are, Dad said bluntly, but not unkindly. But personally, I find it interesting. We Celestials have become so focused on our past that sometimes I wonder if we're missing something important about the future. Before Jay could respond, the lab door slid open and Hannah entered, her purple robes swishing around her ankles. Research Assistant Dai, you're needed in Laboratory 3, she said without preamble. As Dai nodded and left, Hannah turned cool eyes to Jai. Dr. Kim, I trust you'll find everything adequate for your experiments. Jay straightened his shoulders. The facilities are excellent. Thank you. Hannah's gaze fell on the earth seedlings. Those primitive specimens are your solution. Plants that evolved on a completely different world with different soil, different light. Plants are surprisingly adaptable, Jay replied. More so than we sometimes give them credit for. Perhaps on your primitive world, anyone can claim expertise, she said with a dismissive wave of her glowing hand. But here, we value proper pedigree. Your species barely understands its own genome, let alone how to properly enhance it. What could you possibly contribute when you carry no notable genetic markers, no familial achievements of worth? Jay met her gaze steadily. I guess we'll find out when I plant these in the northeastern quadrant tomorrow. Hannah's eyes flashed a bright yellow. You plan to place them directly in the field, without laboratory adaptation first. That's my method, Jay said simply. Sometimes the best way to learn how to swim is to get in the water. How charmingly primitive, Hannah said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I look forward to documenting your failure in detail. She turned and glided out of the lab, leaving behind a faint scent of something like cinnamon. Alone in his new lab, Jay looked out at the struggling landscape beyond the barrier. Well, he said to his seedlings, looks like we got something to prove. 6 months passed on Neoterra. The twin suns rose and set, casting their golden and blue light across the struggling landscape. But in the northeastern quadrant, something was changing. Jay wiped sweat from his forehead as he carefully measured the growth of his newest hybrid plant. It had adapted well, its roots reaching deep into the once barren soil, its leaves spreading wide to capture the unique light of Neoterra's twin suns. Another 2 centimeters since yesterday, he noted, speaking into his recording device. That makes 12% growth increase compared to the control group. The soil analysis shows increasing levels of beneficial bacteria. A shadow fell across his work area. Jai looked up to see Dai approaching, her skin glowing with a pleasant orange hue. Your plants are thriving, she said, kneeling beside him to examine the hybrid. I've never seen anything take to this soil so well. Jay smiled. Over the past months, Dai had become a regular visitor to his field site. Unlike most Celestials who preferred to work from their labs, she seemed genuinely interested in his hands-on approach. It's all about letting the plants find their own way, Jay explained. Instead of trying to make a perfect plant in the lab, I created several varieties and let them compete. The ones that do best I breed again with slight modifications. It's closer to natural evolution. Natural but guided. Dai nodded. It's fascinating. Much slower than our methods, but clearly more effective in this case. She reached out and gently touched one of the leaves, her glowing fingertip leaving a brief trail of light on the green surface. The plant seemed to respond, leaning slightly toward her touch. They're starting to recognize celestial bioenergy, Jay observed. That's new. Is that good? Dai asked. Very good. It means they're not just surviving here. They're beginning to interact with Neoterra's native life. Jad pointed to where his plants bordered some of the struggling native species. Look there. The native silver ferns are starting to show new growth where they're close to my hybrids. Dai's eyes widened, shifting to a bright green of surprise and excitement. The coalition meeting is tomorrow. You should present these findings. Jay hesitated. Hannah still runs the meetings. She's made it clear she doesn't think much of my methods. She can't argue with results, Day said firmly. Besides, I've been sharing your progress reports with some of the other research leads. They're interested. The next day, Jay stood before the coalition, nervous but determined. The large meeting room was filled with celestials, their skin glowing with various colors that reflected their emotions. Hannah sat at the center table, her expression carefully neutral. Dr. Kim, Elder Mun nodded to him. We understand you have progress to report from the northeastern quadrant. Yes, Elder, Jay said, activating the holographic display. Images of his thriving plants appeared in the center of the room. After 6 months of work, we've developed a hybrid species that not only survives in the degraded soil, but actively improves it. He showed them the data, soil composition changes, growth rates, and most importantly, the positive effects on neighboring native plants. Most interesting, another elder commented, her golden skin pulsing with curiosity. Your approach is unorthodox, but these results are impressive. Hannah finally spoke, her voice cool. While I acknowledge the apparent success, I must question the long-term viability. These hybrids are untested over multiple generations. Their genetic stability is unknown. That's a fair concern, Jay conceded. But the first generation is already producing viable seeds, which suggests stable genetics. And more importantly, they're helping the native plants recover. That was the goal, wasn't it? A murmur of agreement went through the room. Even Hannah couldn't deny the evidence before them. Elder Mun nodded slowly. It seems we may have been too quick to judge your methods, Dr. Kim. The Coalition approves continued expansion of your project. Research Assistant Dad will continue as your liaison and will allocate additional resources as needed. After the meeting, the scientists gathered for a small celebration. It was rare for any new approach to show such promise on the first attempt. Many Celestials who had previously ignored Jay now approached him with questions and congratulations. Day found him standing alone by a large window overlooking the northeastern quadrant, where green patches were now visible among the barren areas. You should be proud, she said, handing him a drink. The liquid inside glowed a soft blue. This is quite an achievement. Thanks, Jay said, taking a small sip. The drink tasted like honey and starlight. I couldn't have done it without your help. You believed in my approach when no one else did. Day's skin glowed pink for a moment, a color Jay had never seen on her before. Perhaps I simply recognized the value of different perspectives. Our society has become fixed in its thinking. We believe our way is always best because it has worked for so long. Sometimes the old ways stop working, Jay agreed. That's when you need to try something new. Their conversation was interrupted by Hannah, who approached with measured steps. Her face was composed, but Jay noticed her skin pulsed with rapid flickers of blue and yellow, conflicting emotions. Dr. Kim, she said formally, your presentation was adequate. The council is pleased with the progress. Coming from Hannah, this was high praise. Jay inclined his head. Thank you, head researcher. I still have concerns about long-term stability, she continued. But I acknowledge that your unorthodox methods have produced results where our traditional approaches failed. With that small concession, she turned and walked away, her purple robes swishing around her. Day let out a small laugh. That's the closest thing to an apology you'll ever get from her. I'll take it, Jay smiled. As weeks turned into months, Jay's project continued to thrive. The green patches in the northeastern quadrant spread steadily, with native plants beginning to return alongside his hybrids. But something else was growing too, his friendship with Da. They spent long hours together in the field and the lab. Da taught him more about celestial culture and biology, while he shared stories of Earth and his family's farm. Despite their different backgrounds, they found many common interests and values. One evening, as they walked along the edge of the newly flourishing section of land, Da stopped suddenly. Ja, she said, her voice unusually serious. There's something I need to tell you. Jay turned to her, noticing that her skin was glowing with that same pink hue he had seen once before. What is it? Celestials can sense emotional connections, she began. It's part of our biology. When two celestials form a deep bond, their bioluminescence begins to synchronize. Jay nodded. I've noticed that with some of the research pairs. Yes, but what's rare, almost unheard of, is for a celestial to synchronize with a non-celestial. She held out her hand, palm up, the glow pulsing gently. Yet whenever you're nearby, my light responds to your presence. It changes to match your emotional state, even though you don't glow yourself. Ja looked at her hand, then back at her face. What does that mean? It means I've formed a connection with you that goes beyond friendship or professional respect. Day's eyes shifted to a deep purple. Vulnerability, Jay had learned. My people would call it a soul resonance. It's rare, even among celestials. Jay felt his heart beating faster. Over the months, he had developed feelings for Da, but had kept them to himself, believing such a relationship would be impossible given their different species and the Celestials' focus on genetic pedigree. I feel it too, he said softly. I just didn't know if it could ever be. Accepted. Day's skin brightened with joy, but her expression remained serious. It won't be easy. There will be resistance, especially from those like Hannah who value traditional bloodlines above all else. When has anything worthwhile ever been easy? Jay smiled, reaching out to take her glowing hand in his. Their relationship became public knowledge soon after. As Da had predicted, many Celestials disapproved. Some scientists requested transfers from projects that involved Ja. Others simply avoided them both in social situations. Hannah was particularly vocal in her disapproval. One day, she confronted Da in the main laboratory. You come from the lineage of the Starlight Scholars, Hannah said, her voice sharp with disappointment. Your genetic profile contains markers from 5 of our greatest scientific minds. To dilute that with unpedigreed human DNA. It's not merely a personal disgrace. It's a betrayal of our entire evolutionary path. Day stood tall, her skin glowing steadily. Our evolutionary path has led us to stagnation, Hannah. When was the last time a celestial child was born with stronger abilities than their parents? Our careful breeding hasn't improved our species. It's limiting us. That's nonsense, Hannah scoffed. Our genetic program has given us the most advanced abilities in the known galaxy. And yet, a human with no genetic enhancements solved a problem that stumped our best minds for years, Da countered. Perhaps there's something to be said for natural adaptation and diversity. The argument spread through the research center. Some younger Celestials began to side with Da, questioning the traditional focus on pedigree. Others, mostly older researchers, stood firmly with Hannah in defense of their genetic traditions. Through it all, Jay and Day's relationship deepened. After many discussions, they decided to formalize their union according to celestial custom. The ceremony was small, attended by the few Celestials who supported them and several human colleagues who traveled from Earth for the occasion. Elder Mun, who had come to respect Jay's work, performed the ritual binding their life energies together. As they stood hand in hand, Joy in a formal Earth suit and Da in shimmering robes that reflected her glowing skin, a small miracle occurred. For a brief moment, Jay's skin seemed to glow with a faint light that pulsed in perfect harmony with Da's. Soul resonance made visible, Elder Mun whispered in awe. I haven't seen this in centuries. The news of this phenomenon spread quickly, causing even more debate among the Celestials. And when 2 months later, Day announced she was pregnant, the controversy reached its peak. Celestial pregnancies were rare and precious, with most couples needing genetic assistance to conceive. For Day to become pregnant so easily with a human partner was unexpected, and to many, deeply concerning. Hannah insisted on personally monitoring the pregnancy, claiming scientific interest. But both Jay and Da knew she was looking for problems, for proof that their union was a mistake. What none of them knew was that the children growing within Dai would soon change everything they thought they understood about genetics, evolution, and the true meaning of pedigree. Dai's pregnancy progressed differently than typical celestial pregnancies, where most celestial mothers glowed with a steady, gentle light throughout their term. Dai's luminescence changed daily. Some mornings her skin shimmered with bright gold. Other days it pulsed with deep blues or soft purples. The medical staff had never seen anything like it. Hannah recorded every detail, her face neutral but her eyes sharp with interest. "These readings are unusual," she said during one examination, looking at the holographic displays hovering above Dai's rounded belly. "The fetal neural activity is off the charts." Joe, who never left Dai's side during these checkups, leaned forward. "Is that bad?" "Not necessarily," Hannah replied reluctantly. "Just different. The brain patterns don't match standard celestial development." "Perhaps because the baby is not standard celestial," Dai said calmly, placing a protective hand over her stomach. The skin there glowed brighter at her touch. Hannah's mouth tightened. "Yes, well, that much is obvious." What none of them expected was that Dai carried not one baby, but two. The twins had hidden one from detection, their energy signatures blending so perfectly that they appeared as a single entity until the 6th month. "Twins," gasped the medical technician during a routine scan. "I'm seeing two distinct heartbeats now." Jay's face broke into a wide smile. "Twins run in my family. My mother was a twin." Hannah made a note on her tablet. "Interesting. The genetic influence appears stronger than anticipated." Her tone made it sound like a problem rather than a blessing. As the pregnancy entered its final weeks, interest in the unprecedented hybrid babies grew throughout the celestial community. Some viewed the pregnancy with concern, others with curiosity, and a growing minority with hope, especially younger celestials who had begun questioning the strict genetic hierarchies of their society. Joe continued his work in the northeastern quadrant, which now bloomed with life. His hybrid plants had transformed the once barren region into a lush landscape where both Earth-derived and native species thrived together. The success of his project had earned him respect, even among those who disapproved of his relationship with Da. One evening, as Jay worked late in his laboratory analyzing soil samples, Elder Munn paid him an unexpected visit. "Your work continues to impress," the elder said, his golden skin glowing softly in the dim lab. "Thank you, Elder," Jay replied, setting aside his equipment. "The ecosystem is stabilizing faster than I predicted." The elder nodded, but his expression suggested he had come for more than a progress report. "I wanted to speak with you about your children." Jay tensed slightly. "Is there a problem?" "Not a problem," Elder Munn said carefully. "But there are discussions among the council. Many are concerned about what these children will mean for our society. Mixed species offspring are unprecedented among celestials." "I'm aware of the concerns," Jay said. "But with respect, Elder, these children are ours, mine and Daz. Their meaning to your society is secondary to their meaning to us." Elder Munn's eyes shifted to a thoughtful blue. "An interesting perspective. Very human." He paused. "But you should know that Hannah has submitted a formal request to study the children once they're born. For scientific purposes." Jay's jaw tightened. "Study them how?" "Nothing invasive," the elder assured him. "Observation, developmental assessments, genetic analysis from standard medical samples." "And if we refuse?" Elder Munn sighed. "It would be within your rights, but it would only increase the suspicion and fear. Perhaps allowing some limited study would help ease concerns." Jay considered this. "I'll discuss it with Da. But any research would have to be conducted with our full consent and oversight." The elder nodded, a reasonable compromise. 2 days later, Dai went into labor. Celestial births typically lasted only a few hours, but days continued for nearly a full day. Jay stayed by her side, holding her hand as her skin flickered through a rainbow of colors with each contraction. Outside the birthing center, a crowd gathered. Scientists, officials, and curious citizens, all waiting to hear about the first human celestial children. Finally, in the quiet hours before dawn, the twins were born within minutes of each other. A boy and a girl, both with skin that glowed like their mother's, but with their father's dark hair and slightly rounder faces. "They're perfect," Di whispered tiredly, cradling the newborns. Her skin glowed with a deep, contented rose color. Ja leaned close, overcome with emotion. "What should we name them?" Day smiled. In the celestial tradition, twins are often named as complementary pairs. She looked down at the boy, whose skin glowed with a golden light. "He shines like your Earth's sun." "Sun," Jay nodded. "A good name." He gently touched the girl, whose glow was silvery white. "And she reminds me of Earth's moon." "Sun and moon," Day said softly. "Perfect balance." The medical staff moved efficiently around them, taking readings and samples. Hannah stood in the corner, watching with clinical interest. The initial readings showed normal vital signs, the head doctor reported. Both infants display standard celestial bioluminescence, though with unusual patterns. Indeed, the baby's skin didn't glow with the steady light of pure celestials. Instead, their luminescence pulsed and shifted, responding to their emotions and surroundings in a way that was both familiar and entirely new. Hannah approached the bed, her eyes fixed on the newborns. "May I?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Jay hesitated, then nodded. Hannah placed a scanner above each child in turn, studying the results with intense focus. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Their neural patterns are unlike anything I've seen before. Not celestial, not human, but something new." "Is there a problem?" Di asked, her arms tightening protectively around her babies. "No," Hannah admitted reluctantly. "They appear healthy. Just different." She looked up at Jay and Di. "I'll need to conduct further tests to understand the implications. As we discussed with Elder Munn, any testing will require our consent," Jay reminded her firmly. Hannah's lips thinned, but she nodded. "Of course, we'll proceed according to protocol." In the days that followed, sun and moon became the center of attention throughout the celestial community. Scientists came to observe them, officials visited to welcome them formally, and ordinary citizens passed by the family's quarters, hoping for a glimpse of the historic children. Unlike typical celestial newborns, who remained calm and quiet most of the time, sun and moon were active and responsive. They reacted strongly to voices and touch, their skin glowing brighter when their parents were near. Most surprising was how they responded to each other. When one twin was upset, the other's skin would pulse in a soothing rhythm until their sibling calmed. "They're communicating," Day realized on the 5th day, watching this exchange, but not just with normal celestial empathy. "This is something deeper." Jay nodded. "It's like they can feel each other's emotions." Hannah, who was recording these interactions, looked up with rare excitement in her eyes. "If I may, I'd like to try an experiment." With the parents' permission, she placed the twins in separate rooms, something that would cause no distress to normal celestial babies, who didn't form strong attachments until much later in development. Immediately, both sun and moon began to cry, their skin flashing with distress. More remarkably, the patterns of their distress were identical, flashing in perfect synchronization despite the wall between them. "Telepathic connection," Hannah murmured, staring at the readings. "At birth. This is unheard of." When the twins were reunited, they immediately calmed, their skin returning to a peaceful glow. By the end of their first month, it became clear that sun and moon were developing faster than either human or celestial babies. They recognized voices, responded to their names, and most remarkably, showed signs of intentional communication through their bioluminescence. "They're using light patterns to express needs," Di explained to the research team that had been assembled to document the twins' development. "Different patterns for hunger, comfort, attention." Hannah, who had shifted from skepticism to intense scientific interest, nodded. and they're capable of maintaining these patterns for communication even when separated. The question is whether this is an enhancement of normal celestial abilities or something entirely new. Does it matter? Jai asked. They're healthy and thriving. Isn't that what's important? Hannah gave him a look that suggested his question missed the point entirely. Of course it matters. If these abilities are the result of genetic combination rather than enhancement, it challenges everything we understand about evolutionary development. As the twins reached their 3rd month, they began to display another unexpected ability. During a routine visit to Jay's plant laboratory, Moon reached toward one of the struggling seedlings. Her tiny hand glowed with a soft green light, and before everyone's eyes, the plant straightened and its leaves brightened. "Did you see that?" Joe gasped, kneeling beside his daughter. Day nodded, her eyes wide. "Try it again," she suggested, placing another weak seedling near Moon. The baby reached out eagerly, her skin glowing with the same green light. Once again, the plant responded, growing visibly stronger. Hannah, who had accompanied them that day, recorded everything with her scanner. "Biokinetic interaction," she said, unable to hide her amazement. "She's somehow sharing energy with the plant." Not to be outdone, Sun began to display his own unique talents. While his sister connected with plants, he showed an affinity for technology. Celestial devices would activate when he touched them, responding to his bioluminescent pulses as if they were command codes. It's as if they each inherited different aspects of both species and developed them beyond what either could do alone, Dai observed, watching Sun playfully turn the lights in their quarters on and off with his touch. Word of the twins' abilities spread quickly. Scientists from across Neoterra requested permission to observe them. Even other worlds in the coalition sent representatives, eager to witness what many were now calling evolutionary leaps. Hannah, who spent more time with the family than anyone else, recording every developmental milestone, remained professionally detached. But occasionally, Jay caught her watching the twins with an expression that seemed almost like wonder. 6 months after their birth, during a formal assessment with the Council of Elders, Sun and Moon demonstrated abilities that left even the most skeptical celestials speechless. Placed in a room with a withered native plant that had resisted all attempts at revival, Moon gently touched its leaves. Instead of simply energizing it as she had done before, she closed her eyes and her skin shifted to a deep purple, the color of concentration among celestials. "She's communing with it," Dai whispered in awe. After several minutes, Moon opened her eyes and made a series of light pulses toward her brother. Sun approached and placed his hands on the soil around the plant. His skin glowed with a different pattern, and suddenly small monitoring devices emerged from the soil. Devices that had been buried to measure conditions, but had long since stopped functioning. The twins worked together, Moon connecting with the plant, while Sun repaired and reprogrammed the monitoring equipment. Before the astonished council, they created a perfect symbiosis of nature and technology that began to heal the dying plant. Elder Mun turned to Jai and Da, his golden skin pulsing with excitement. "This is beyond anything we could have imagined. They aren't just combining our abilities, they're creating new ones." Even Hannah, standing at the back of the room with her ever-present tablet, could no longer maintain her scientific detachment. For the first time since Jai had known her, her skin glowed with the warm orange of genuine admiration. The implications were clear to everyone present. Sun and Moon represented not a dilution of celestial genetics as many had feared, but an evolutionary step forward, one that might never have occurred without the introduction of human adaptability into the carefully maintained celestial gene pool. And as the twins smiled up at their parents, their skin glowing with happiness, it was impossible to deny that sometimes the most magnificent offspring come from unexpected unions.